the words verbatim that I said to my team, which is literally verbatim. I always said 1 or 2 clicks past reality, not so far, but just a couple, so that we know we're in a heightened, slightly surrealistic world enough. So it's deliberate. I think like the term camp gets thrown around, but camp can be, the point is it's deliberate, it's intentional.
Hello, and welcome back to The Director's Cut, brought to you by the Directors Guild of America. Today's episode takes us behind the scenes of director Josh Greenbaum's new comedy, Barb and Star Go to Vista Del Mar. The film tells the story of best friends Barb and Star, who leave their small Midwestern town for the first time to vacation in Vista Del Mar, Florida, and soon find themselves tangled up in adventure, love, and a villain's evil plot to murder the entire town. In addition to Barb and Star Go to Vista Del Mar, Mr. Greenbaum's other directorial credits include episodes of the series Bless This Mess, Fresh Off the Boat, and New Girl, the television documentary series Behind the Mask, and the documentary feature Becoming Bond. Mr. Greenbaum spoke with fellow director Guillermo del Toro about filming Barb and Star Go to Vista Del Mar in front of a virtual audience. Listen on for their spoiler-filled conversation.
Hello, everybody. And here we are, Guillermo and Josh. Welcome, Josh, to this little conversation about your fabulous and insane movie.
Thanks, Guillermo.
No, thank you. I was, before we get to the movie, which is the main conversation, and I have so much to ask you about, the great surprise is your first movie. That's stylistically very difficult to achieve what you did, thematically very different, tonally incredibly difficult, tonally really, really difficult, because you balance, when somebody says, oh, well, zany is easy. Zany is incredibly difficult to sustain and shape over a feature. It may be easy in a short where you have to pay off 3-4 minutes, but you chose that tone. You chose every single thing you chose made it hard, and it's your first movie. So I want to know, I know your brother, so I know you come from a very masochistic family, but I would like very much for you to tell us where you come from and how did you get to this first feature?
Sure. Well, thank you very much, and thanks for doing this. Well, the short version of my background is I have worked in documentary a lot, and I have worked in sort of narrative shorts, as you said, short films. But yeah, this is my first narrative feature, and it was I've sort of been sitting here for a good 5-10 years looking for that first narrative story to tell, wanting it to be unique and loud and different, and something that I feel like I would have a stamp on it. And this came about in a really wonderful, organic way. And of course, I couldn't say no to it. But yeah, I mean, I don't want to go too far back, but the origin of how I came to the film is I made a documentary 2 films ago called Becoming Bond, which was about the story of George Lazenby, who some may know as the one-time James Bond.
Fantastic.
And he has an amazing story. And I took his story, he told it to me on camera, and then I reenacted about 75% of it. In the reenactments, what I was excited by was they were very comedic in nature, most of them. I mean, there's certainly some emotional stuff as well, but it's a very funny, wild tale. And the reason I'm bringing that up is I had a screening of that, whatever it was now, 2 or 3 years ago, maybe more. And the producer of Barb and Star, Jessica Elbaum, one of the producers, came to that screening, and she brought Kristen Wiig with her. And I didn't know that. And I was there. I think my brother was there, another Greenbaum that you know. And after the screening of this film, Kristen walked up to me and said, wow, I love this. I would love to work together. Mm-hmm. And, let's grab a lunch. And I, sort of had this knee buckling moment because I'm such a huge fan of hers. Not unlike when you tweeted about our movie, I had a similar oh my God, I was so excited. I can't tell you. So, but anyway, I sort of wasn't sure if that was real, if it was going to become anything. And a couple of days later, we had lunch, and she pitched me what you saw as Barb and Star, although a much longer, it was like a 2.5-hour lunch. She pitched the full movie, acting out all the characters. And, I sort of said to her, if the script is anything like what you just pitched, I would, I'm so excited and so in. So that's the origin of how I came to it.
The screenplay already existed?
Yes, the screenplay had existed. She and Annie wrote it, but I don't know if she just wanted, I think like with this movie, she wanted me to know what I was about to read. I think we had the same feeling when we submitted to like Jamie Dornan for Edgar. There's that fear of like, is this going to be, does this need any prefacing? But yeah, it was written, an early draft of it.
Fantastic choice, by the way.
Oh, thank
you. Casting in a minute, but
yeah.
So the screenplay existed. How much did you have to tweak it once it came to you?
Not a lot. I'm sure the normal answer is just paring it down. Like Kristen and Annie have these, I've often described them as like these, like children. And I mean that in the best way, and an idea will happen and they get inspired and it's like, oh, let's run and do this thing. Let's run and do this joke or this storyline. And so it had a lot of what you see in the final film, which is just this, sort of crazy turning left, turning right when you're least expecting it. But, I just kind of worked with them for, I can't remember what it was, a few months to maybe a little bit longer to pare the script down, focus it. And a big part of it for me, to one of your early questions about tone, was figuring out how to anchor the film, because it is, it does go kind of all over the place in such a wonderful way. But I think even, as you said, even in the zaniest films, you need something connected to the ground, whatever that might be. I think that was a lot of the work that we did together. And, but yeah, I wish I could tell you exactly. I'm sure it changed a good amount, but so much of what I love about the film right now existed in those early drafts.
Yeah, but look, you can have the partiture to the Fifth Symphony, and you still have to execute it and direct it. And what I think is there's one element of tone that exists in the dramaturgy of a movie, the rhythm of the dialogue, the pitch of the characters, and all of that. But then you can grab exactly the same screenplay and execute it tonally, audio-visually, and rhythmically, like Napoleon Dynamite. You can decide you're going to ground it in the most indie reality with certain flourishes, certain rhythms, but you anchor it in that reality. You went for a very ambitious directorial, audiovisual tone. It's almost like in order for these characters to live, you elevated the everything is heightened. The color palette, the texture of palette, the obviously the tone of the delivery and the pitch and the rhythm, but everything is one or two notches above real, but not more than that, because then the tone is too dangerous. You're not going into Tim Burton territory and Edward Scissorhands. You're keeping it floating between real and not, because in this terrarium, in this living zoological space that you create for characters, Kristen Wiig has to live, Annie has to live, but also an albino villain with a super villain sidekick that is a kid with a paper route, and a forlorn love anguished Jamie Dornan that just wants to formally engage to someone. All those elements. If you have an audiovisual tone that is more sedate, they will not root. So it's extremely difficult, extremely wise. Was there a model you took? Is there any inspiration you said, I'm going to do it like this? Or what guided you in deciding as director audiovisually that tone?
I laughed out loud a second ago because you said the words verbatim that I said to my team, which is literally verbatim. I always said 1 or 2 clicks past reality, not so far, but just a couple, so that we know we're in a heightened, slightly surrealistic world enough. So it's deliberate. I think like the term camp gets thrown around, but camp can be, the point is it's deliberate, it's intentional.
Let me interrupt you, because there is a thing that can happen, okay?
Yeah.
This didn't happen. When camp is a position where you are above the material, looking down on it, it dies.
Right.
It becomes satirical and it suffocates and asphyxiates the life of the thing. you're not above the material. You're getting high on your own supply. You are the main consumer of it, and that has a sincerity and a purity that is gets thrown around too casually, in my opinion. Sorry to interrupt you.
No, I appreciate that, and you're absolutely right. But absolutely, there was an element of creating our own world, and that has some fantastical element to it. Certainly not as fantastical as a wonderful like Pan's Labyrinth, but still we have to create our own world of where, as you said, all these characters can coexist. And it's still surprising, but not world breaking that a crab starts talking or a giant musical number happens. But it's able to exist in that world. So,
but if one of them doesn't happen, the other one doesn't happen. This is very important.
Yeah.
Because when it happens, it cannot happen in town. It's too early for the musical number. But when they arrive there, we want a musical number as an audience, right? Yeah. We want to see the change from the drab reality, everyday mundane world to this fantastic escape, which is Vista Del Mar.
Yeah. Well, it's funny you brought up the earlier question about script changes. One of the things we changed early on was that opening sequence where Yo-Yo's on his bike throwing the newspapers. The very early drafts, as he was going, and they were great jokes, but it was like, he throws his newspaper and first it lands on some, an old lady baking a pie who waves to him. The next time it lands, it's, a squirrel waves. And you're like, huh. Then there's a family of bears who are out throwing pitch and catch. Very funny, and then there was like an old timey stagecoach, very funny. But to your point, I felt like it wasn't quite welcoming you into the film in a way of saying like, let me ground you first and then slowly keep surprising you. And again, I don't want to just say me, it's a conversation with Chris and Annie, the brilliant screenwriters behind it. But that's an important choice, I think, of how we first kick things off. But
you can have a tone in planning and a tone in execution.
Yeah.
They don't balance. Look, that's a very wise decision because you open already colorful, you open already in a very lively way, but then everything seems to be heightened, but it's one notch. Then immediately the next notch happens when he gets retinal scanned into an elevator into a secret layer.
Right.
Then you go, okay. By the way, it happens early enough.
Yes.
Which is wise because then you say, all right.
Yeah.
Fasten your seatbelts because anything goes now.
That's right.
And then you go sedate, a little bit more sedate again.
Yeah. So that was an interesting decision editorially. I remember actually, I had the pleasure of sitting with you at an event, and I was in the middle of editing, and I asked for your editing advice. And
I remember.
And you said, several wise things, but one of the things you said was just mix it all up. Take your first scene, put it in the middle, or take your middle scene and put it first, and just breathe life and try things out. And to that end, we certainly looked at and explored, well, what if we start with Barb and Star? But immediately I realized, like, no, we have to at least start you in this world that it's heading toward and give you a taste of it to know that, because I think otherwise you really get too sideswiped. You're like, oh, this is Bridesmaids 2 with older ladies. And now, wait, why is there an albino villain?
Yes.
And so I think order, which I would also say is a big part of documentary filmmaking. When do I tell you what I want to tell you in what order?
That's a good discipline you already had.
Yeah, because it's a big difference. If I tell you this bit of information earlier, you're going to judge your character one way. If I move it later, you have a totally different experience.
In a way, a documentary is like a trial where you sit down as a juror, and in comes the victim's family, and you go, oh my God, and then in comes the father of the accused, and you go, oh my God, that poor, you're swayed again and again, and that's not very different from comedy, in which I think comedy is a hostage situation. I sit down on the audience and say, okay, make me laugh.
Yeah.
Come on, you're so smart. It's a very antagonistic genre. Then comes the pitch, in which you say, okay, here's me. I'm going to make you laugh. And if you don't, the bond is broken.
It's broken immediately.
And I think that's when the tone, we had the tone, pitch, the frequency, the velocity, because of the jokes. when people say, like, you can have a movie that is 3 hours long and feels like an hour and a half. And I have, and many of us have witnessed movies that are 85 and feel like 3 hours long. And when I talk about editing, I always say is not the velocity of the events, is the number of steps that you need to get to the next event.
Mm-hmm.
And that's in comedy with the jokes. If you're too fast, you're top secret airplane, and you have to commit to that joke rhythm and pay it off at the end. But your rhythm fluctuates nicely. What were the models for the comedy for you?
I mean, you sort of you hit them. Certainly, what in that first conversation with Kristen, she referenced what, again, in your tweet blew my mind, because she literally said it's Romeo and Michelle's high school reunion meets Airplane,
and Top Secret for me,
and Top Secret, which I was like, this is so exciting. Those are two of my favorite films. At the same time, I'm a little semi-panicked as a director of like, I don't know what that means. Like, where does one is a grounded semi-earnest comedy. And the other is, satirical spoof, and figuring out how those can kind of coexist, I think, was my immediate sort of question and challenge of tone. But those were kind of the reference points. Comedy is so subjective. I think which was so great was Kristen and Annie and I were all on the exact same wavelength, and that was the core creative team, along with our producers, Margot Hand and Jessica Elbaum. But if the three of us or five of us were laughing, that was it. It was like, okay, we have to trust that, and of course, later on you try to show it to audiences and get feedback. But it's just, I think comedy to an extent is your gut, and you have to kind of trust it and go with it. And there's times, I think with this film, there was times when we knew the joke was how long we're staying in the bit. Right. We're doing a 2.5-minute musical number with Jamie Dornan where he's singing his feelings. And part of the fun of that is just how long we're taking to tell you this one tiny story piece. Yeah. But then you can't do that 5 more times. It's sort of, and there was other bits that I loved that we cut out while they were so funny. It's just like, you can't play that sort of same.
You cut out, how many did you cut out?
I would say, a good, of that style of joke, maybe 4 or 5. There was, but one of my favorite jokes is when the ladies find out they're losing their job at Jennifer Convertibles. The boss, we had this funny idea on set that the boss, after he tells them the store's closing and they can't process it, their whole world is being so shaken up. He gets up as they're asking him questions like, so tomorrow we don't go in? I don't understand. He literally gets up, walks into the background of the scene, fills up his coffee. They're still talking, going, so is tomorrow, it's not, the lights won't be on? Will we not be? He comes all the way back and sits down. And, it's just one of those beats that was so funny, but, you have to kill your darlings in that sense that it's like, oh, we do play that kind of joke later on. And
you do. I mean, the wisdom of editing is recognizing that do I have this beat already? Later, sooner, earlier.
Yeah.
And in the editing room the other day, we took out one of my favorite shots of the movie I just shot. A shot that we were high-fiving. Yeah. But that's the decision making, because again, when they're talking about that, you get the beats, you get the characters, you get their obliviousness, you can stretch it, but is it worth it?
Right. That's right.
In that wisdom is not common on a first feature. So you of the shorts you did, you can handle comedy so well. So were you a student of comedy as a genre, or are you a student of comedy as a genre?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, those are my favorite films. I grew up on them. In a weird way, when I look back at my favorite films as a child, this is sort of an amalgam of them, because I grew up on John Hughes, and those were sort of my favorites. But at the same time, my dad introduced me to Monty Python, and I discovered, Airplane and Top Secret and Mel Brooks, and these sort of like more spoof satirical things. And but yeah, I it's in a way, it's always funny to me that, that I do feel as though comedy, in terms of like I don't know, I guess the critical or the critical eye of the filmmaking community or the sort of award side, I'm like, I think it's really hard to pull off. And I don't mean that just because I make comedies, but I also think of it as actors. I often find that, it's interesting to see how many great comedic actors can then turn dramatic, because I think the best ones are doing both. They're doing the dramatic work, but they're adding that comedic element.
Yes.
And you saw it with
there's no comedy without depth.
Yeah, exactly.
There's no fine comedy without depth.
Yeah. By the way, there's an interesting reference I remember making when we were working on the script together, which is I actually brought up a movie Dumb and Dumber to Kristen and Annie, because it's a very broad, silly, funny comedy, but there's a scene in it that's worth revisiting, which is Jim Carrey breaking down emotionally and saying, I'm tired of being a nobody, I'm tired of having nobody. And it's this very emotional beat that you kind of forget in this very silly, fun comedy. But it's that moment that first of all, you can see his dramatic acting chops right there, but you also all of a sudden feel for this guy, as silly as the movie is, and you're anchored. And now you can go on all these hilarious journeys with him. And to me, that was the same thing. And we worked really hard on the bedroom scene, which is in Barb and Star, which is where they kind of reveal that maybe they're not that happy with their lives, and this feeling that they've lost, as they put it, their shimmer, which I think is universal for people in their middle-aged years, but I think for anybody, losing that sense of purpose, that sense of confidence. And so that was a really critical scene in my mind in terms of grounding the film enough that I care about these characters, I relate to them, and I will go on this journey with them, as crazy as it will soon get.
Well, I think that my opinion, and it's only my opinion, is not a universal truth, is that it is much easier for a comedic actor that is handling incredible precision and timing and delivery, and they are great comedic actors are using all the tools in the box for sure, and it's easier for a great comedic actor to transition to drama than it is for a dramatic actor to find the incredibly difficult tempo of comedy and the delivery, unless he's playing a straight man. I think, but you inherit a tradition that comes all the way, if you go back, to Laurel and Hardy, and now that goes through Romy and Michelle, as you discussed, which is very much like Candide, the Voltaire idea of somebody that is so oblivious to reality and such a fool in almost the tarot card sense that is going to go through life without staining. One big difference for me, and this is, I think they both are fantastic, the main characters. The one big difference is when Jamie Dornan comes in and the sexual element appears in the movie, it's an incredibly liberating element. Is not judgmental. It doesn't judge the characters. The characters don't judge themselves. They go into an orgy of the senses, and there's no hangover about it. There's no filter to talk about physical needs. Because I can recognize other things. I can recognize the sort of when Jamie sings is a little bit like that mid-level euphoria, a huge euphoria about a mid-level achievement, like Flight of the Conchords. It's like the most beautiful girl in the room. It's not about something. But this I don't recognize. This is such a finding, I think, of you and the stars, which are the screenwriters, and it's an element that you have to be fearless, but also an incredibly forgiving and secure human being to execute. Tell me about this element, if you can, the discussions you had with them about it.
Yeah, and about, specifically the sort of like the sexual awakening element of it, or the
everything.
Yeah.
Most of these comedies, either, if you go to the raunchy side, they get into an exploitative side, which can be very funny, or they are virginal.
Yeah.
And I think there's nothing in between. And
Yeah.
this movie achieves that in between beautifully. So let's
Thank
talk
you.
about that.
Yeah. Well, I think the basis for all of it was, and this happened with my very early conversations with Jamie Dornan and casting him, and then was just this idea of grounding it as again, it's as silly as the movie gets. What they want, who they are, is very real. And so, Jamie's character Edgar desperately wants love. He wants to feel seen. And so I think there's an innocence on his end, right, in terms of this sexual awakening and this experience that he has with Barb and Star. And similarly, I think Barb and Star, and they sort of say it the next morning after, as you said, an orgy of the senses of their night, but it is in many ways.
Food, drink.
By the way, one of my side tangent, but one of my favorite moments after this film has come out, it's both really funny and kind of emotional. But my my brother and my uncle is currently dying of brain cancer, and he saw the film and he loved it, and he shared with me. And his wife took a video of him while he was watching the film, and he was tears falling from laughter, and he couldn't quite get out the sentence. And then he finally was like, "Oh, a naked sandwich," and he was crying and laughing about a naked sandwich. And it was like, I don't know, I'm sure you experience this. Like, you kind of forget why you make things. Like, you just like, big picture meaning, like, I'm excited to make something. It's all about executing it. Is the right length? Is the jokes right? And for the first time, I had this moment of sort of sitting back and seeing what like a really silly comedy can do to lift someone's spirits. But it also was so funny because here's my uncle laughing and saying naked sandwich, which I'd never heard that term, but it's basically what it is in the film.
But there's also a beauty, a liberating look. We exist in a moment right now in which if we can allow ourselves to be human, is the greatest thing we can do for the future. If we allow ourselves to have dimensions that are not normally addressed, and this is a dimension these two characters have in a most moving way. We talk about the innocence. I think there is innocence. There's a purity. There's a purity to the movie. There's a humanism to it, which Renoir has, very different, but Renoir has it in his films. There is nothing that is human that is alien to the characters. The villain is ultimately fragile. Is ultimately somebody that would like to be loved, blah blah blah. But these two women are have that dimension that is fantastic. That is that is not. It doesn't have to be. Is played in earnest in its power, and it is so fantastic to me to see that, because that is an element that is not only works as a comedy but as a very liberating character trait, because you don't expect it from where they work, their talking club, and they remain very forgiving. Oh, when they find out what each other did behind each other's back.
Well, yeah, not only, and one of my favorite scenes in the film is when it is when they're lying about having what they did that night, and they both saw a turtle.
And you repeat the same shot.
Yeah. The double date, yeah. But when they finally lie to each other and say, "I saw a turtle," "Oh, I was in the bath with the turtle," what's so sweet in that moment, and Kristen and Annie pull off so incredibly because it's very difficult, is they lie. But then as the other one listens, they totally believe each other, right? Yeah. They say, you walked a turtle home? And there's that sort of innocence. And I think, that comes from Kristen and Annie, their friendship, that they've had for 20 plus years, but also their writing. I mean, part of what I responded to so much when I first read it and when I met Kristen and ultimately Annie was that's sort of who they are as well. And I share that same feeling spiritually. It's not very cynical, the voice behind it, which a lot of comedies are. There's not as much of an axe to grind. And I think the prospect at the end of the film of defeating the villain via kindness, sweetness, and friendship was very sweet. I hadn't really seen that before. It wasn't like It wasn't like some skill they gathered in Act Two that enabled them to defeat the villain. I mean, I think Act Two reminded them of what they had early on, which is this beautiful relationship and friendship. And of course, there's this absurd, wonderful moment where, they're saved by Trish, the water spirit,
Yes, of course.
which is really obviously out of nowhere, but in many ways it's not. It's, as if you want to sort of analyze it, it's like, well, that is the embodiment, the representation of their friendship. They sat on a 5-hour flight and talked nonstop about this fictional character so much that in the reality of our movie, it created her, or she was real.
But that is, I think, one of the things I love about the movie. We enter from our world and we see them, and the comedy on the beginning is malleable, but the tone is alien. We're getting used to it. And then at the end, the world belongs to them. They shape it. They really shape it. I mean, it's very easy to talk about empowerment and this and that, and then figures of empowerment can very dangerously get idealized, and these are very powerful characters because they have traits, defects, they lie, they do this, they do that, but they almost conjure the world the way they need it, and the world bends to their needs. I tell you, when we're talking about comedians, when you see the skeleton twins, and you realize that the depth that is needed to execute comedy, and especially in this movie, if you don't have that friendship, if you don't believe that they pitch their day every day, they start pitching the world to each other, and then almost like 10-year-olds, and the other one, and that's how they sustain their life. It's so beautiful.
Yeah. Well, I thank you for saying that. And I've always loved and been drawn to friendship stories, and, I've not stopped to analyze it, but I think to an extent they're love stories, right? They're sort of platonic love stories. And in some ways they can be more powerful.
Or sometimes with a naked sandwich.
Yeah. Exactly.
Occasional naked sandwich.
With an occasional naked sandwich, which makes it less platonic momentarily. No, but there's something about that. And I think as we get older, your friends become your surrogate family. And there's also something so beautifully unconditional about when, I've had the benefit of having some really close friends in my life, and it's unconditional, whereas even in romantic relationships, there's always maybe that lingering feeling of, if my looks change, will they still like me? If I don't succeed in my job, will they still love me? And really pure friendships don't have that. They just like you for who you are and your soul. And I think at its core, that was, what was so sort of attractive about this project and about these characters. And we sort of always knew, I felt from the directing standpoint, that if you love these two women, if we can get you, Kristen, Annie, myself, the team, to care and love them, the movie will work, right? There's a lot of other questions we have to answer, but that's their sort of their central relationship, and of course their performances, and they're so incredible.
And I think Jamie also is an incredible revelation for me. I mean, I've always admired him. I love him in The Fall. He pulled such a difficult part in The Fall, and every time I've seen him, he has either this almost very intense persona, and then when you see him in his musical number, is just is absolutely disarming.
Yeah. And well, he's still taking that intensity of being a serial killer. Now he's just climbing a palm tree like a cat, but with the same intensity. No, Jamie, I felt so lucky to have gotten Jamie. I always knew, I think we all always knew, ideally we would try to cast someone who is not a comedy actor in that role, just because it always is kind of exciting and it feels like a discovery. And, what the role really required was a commitment to the dramatic in a way. And then the circumstances, will make you funny in a way. And so it was, when I first met Jamie and I got on a Zoom just like this, and we started talking, and I could tell he instantly got the script, loved it. And, we talked a lot early on about like, is this guy an idiot? Is he dumb? Is that the comedy? It's like, no, he's not. He's in love with someone who doesn't love him back, and he's blind to it. And there's, in that sort of desperation, there's a lot of comedy because, I think so much of what's funny is because it's relatable. And I think we all probably have unfortunately been there before, where we're desperate in love with someone.
But I think he is in love with love.
He's in love with love.
And
Absolutely.
I think the beautiful thing.
And being official, Guillermo, being official. That's the official love.
But this is where if you revert this movie and you go to 1940s, 1950s, and you have two guys, and they met a girl that is in love with love. Well, we've seen it.
Yeah.
And the guys end up having romantic, or if it's 60s and 70s, even physical relations, and an error, comedy of errors and all that. But reverting it not only makes it new, it completely changes the polarity of this whole thing. And it's a cleanser. It's a spiritual cleanser to, I think I hunger to meet good people. I like meeting terrible people in cinema and in TV and in drama. Love it. But occasionally when you meet good people, it's so absolutely refreshing. It's an amuse bouche. You go, thank you. I'm prepared for the main course of life again. It's healing even. Yeah. And I think he's the object of desire.
Yeah.
And his baggage obviously it worked for him, but did you discuss his baggage with Shades of Grey and all that?
A little bit, but only to the extent that, well, he has a lot of, strong opinionated fans, or, fervent fans, I should say. And so our real only question, which we both chuckled at, was, well, what will those fans think of this movie? Because I think there is a good chunk of his fans, not all of them, who I think love him from that specific series of films. But no, we didn't actually discuss it much. We discussed his character and, and just that idea of committing, and he came in and did that. And yeah, I think, like you said, it's like from a writing perspective and a character perspective, it is refreshing to sort of see he's a sweet, innocent man who, as you said, loves love. And by the way, it actually makes that role quite difficult because he has to actually jump through a lot of hoops dramatically, right? He's in love with one woman, then he meets another, but he's torn, but he still has this plan to carry out, for our plot, but also so for our, for his own, he's caught in between two women and then he's back and forth. And I love watching his performance. And, there's so many scenes I remember shooting with him where Barb and Star are blah, 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 that double date sequence. He has 2 words in, 7 minutes, but if you rewatch it, watch his performance. It's incredible to watch actors sometimes when they're not speaking and seeing what their reactions are and their little looks. And that can really, by the way, as you know, can also really sell and ground a slightly heightened character or joke,
When you did the musical numbers, they are also very different between each other. Did you study any particular musical directors, or Donen, or who did you?
If it's not clear, I've been sort of yearning to do a Busby Berkeley type of musical number for a long time. So that was the intro hotel musical that was the inspiration. Certainly, once we got our location and we had this beautiful big atrium, we got about 100 dancers and worked with our incredible, costume designer, Tracy Fields, who, outfitted them, along with our production designer, Steve Sacklet, who did such a beautiful job on the film. And so that was kind of the inspiration behind that first musical number. And then, of course, our second one, the Jamie Dornan, was a bit more of I would say, I would reference like music videos from, when I was like a teenager, that kind of like style. A little bit of a cheesiness to it, it's the split screen where he's jumping both directions, but as you said, like celebrating it as
lo-fi.
The lo-fi, exactly. A little bit. By the way, speaking of lo-fi, a lot of discussions over how will we get the seagulls, and what are we going to do about the seagulls on the tire and the seagulls in the sand, and ultimately, in sort of a wonderfully appropriate way, we wound up getting 2 fake seagulls. That's all we could get.
That's
And
it.
I was in the sand, like laying and just wiggling them a little bit, for that shot. And then we, added a little eye blink, and it was like in its low fineness, as you said, it's perfect. It's sort of exactly how we wanted to do
Speaking of animated animals, we cannot let go this discussion without addressing the breakout star of the film, Morgan Freeman, with a D, right?
With a D. Yes.
Important. So, how the hell did you guys come up with Morgan Freeman?
I mean,
it's one of the most amazing discoveries.
It's one of my favorites. That was, there's a couple things that did not change much at all from the draft one that I ever read. That was one of them. And what was really fun about it, I mean, what I always like to shoot things practically wherever I can. So actually in this film, we did all the stunts were all practical, literally. There's a couple like VFX things to help, but like the culottes, we actually strung, but Kristen and Annie, when you have willing actors too, it's like, let's go for it. They went out in the ocean on the jet ski. We shot it in the ocean. But so for the crab, obviously early discussions were like, well, we'll just do CG. You can do CG animals so well. And I really was hoping we didn't have to. So we started to do some research, and I found a couple guys in England who have crab puppets, and we flew them in. We dug a 4-foot hole in the beach, put a little piece of plywood over, and a puppeteer was under the, 4 feet down on the beach controlling. Well, so I had the recording of the Morgan Freeman dialogue that played out of a speaker. And Kristen got to sit next to this crab and act opposite him in real time. And there was 2 guys, one guy controlling, like, I think it was the claws maybe, and another guy controlling the eyes and the mouth. And they were this incredible, and I was, I'm sure you've obviously experienced this. You're giving direction to the puppeteers, which is really fun.
I also been in the hole.
Have you?
Yes, when I started, but keep going.
I felt so bad because, by the way, we shot in Mexico with an incredible crews there in Churubusco Studios in Mexico City, and then in Cancun. It was 95 degrees or 92 degrees and 95% humidity. And so, like, just looking at, we're just pouring sweat all day. I mean, that was sort of one of the biggest challenges of making the film. But this poor guy was buried in the sand. But it was great. It's so fun because on set, you can see if you got it. You go like, oh, no, we got it. As opposed to like, oh, later on, we'll put the CG in and it'll work.
Well, I think that one of the things that I love the most about this, and I really feel is refreshing. This is not a movie that started as a concept in an executive's head, or that was then produced by a couple of guys trying to be funny, but trying to be this was something that started with Kristen and Annie, right?
Yeah.
They started it. They went at it. They had it made. They executed it with you. There's a partnership there.
Yeah.
I remember when I watch pre-code cinema or the 40s, and you see power figures like Barbara Stanwyck, John Crawford, Betty Davis. It's so necessary it's so refreshing, powerful, and necessary to have these projects gestated by a strong female point of view that has and that is going to treat the experience differently, because I really think this movie is unlike anything. At the end of the day, you can see the roots, but it's unlike anything.
Yeah.
And then find a partner that is equally insanely committed as you. That is extremely fortunate. I think that if you can talk a little bit about them from beginning through the shoot until the end, which is when you guys decide, along with Lionsgate, to release it digitally. Talk to me a little bit about that partnership.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you just said the word that, fortunate. I mean, I felt so unbelievably fortunate to be working with Kristen and Annie. And like you said, it's such a pure, I think I mentioned earlier in our conversation, I've been reading scripts for years and thinking about what do I want to go for. And you're looking for that thing that's like, there's a voice behind it. It's singular in its purpose. It's confident, and I think that's exactly what this was. And they're just so bold, I think, as storytellers, and this film is such an example of it. So I felt so fortunate to be partnered with them early. We could tell we got along really great from the start, working on the script together. On set was such a joy. It was a lot of like just collaboration, but they also gave me the space, which I think could often not happen, right? With like star writers, they definitely said, it was a joy to sort of surprise them, and they show up on set of the musical number. Because, as you know, in a script, it says like a big musical number happens, and then it's our job to figure out what does that look like. So that the kind of trust that we had in one another throughout the process, I was so grateful for, especially for my first movie. And then in editing, again, it was, they were partners in such a great way, which was we would challenge each other and say, well, I don't know if this is working yet. No, we should cut this. We can't cut this. Those kind of conversations are fantastic. And it was, we often said we were so grateful that somehow this film had no assholes on it. I don't know,
Really?
Yeah, which is, I think is, from even my own, experience in shorts and TV and anything, there's always some problem, right? There's always one.
There's always one.
There's always one. And we kept being
there's
like,
a saying that
it?
if you don't find him after 3 weeks, it's you.
It's you. That's an amazing expression. I hope it wasn't me. I think what we realized is the asshole was the weather, because it was so, because there is a sense of, by the way, of like, when there is an asshole, it often can unify the crew and unify everyone else.
Well, it's a living village.
Yeah. Yeah.
You need the local.
You need it. That's right.
Villain,
Yeah.
But what you say is this partnership went all the way to the editing and then the release, which is
the release. Yeah. So we obviously made the film thinking and knowing it was going to be a big theatrical release, which was thrilling for me, for sure, for everyone. In many ways, it was like, I think comedy's been struggling theatrically prior to the pandemic. And my hope, certainly, and all of our hopes, and Lionsgate included, was like, if there ever was a shot to kind of like say, no, it's back, we kind of felt like this fun, weird, big swing of a movie could. So when they finally called, obviously the pandemic hit. It was July 16th, 2020 was our planned release date. That got obviously pushed. They immediately pushed it a year because they were just like, let's see. And then that was going to not be till, I guess, I can't remember, end of July 2021. And around Christmas time or a little bit earlier, they said, here's our new plan. Which, as you could imagine, there was a lot of back and forth, and, less so, by the way, in terms of like, no, we should hold out for theatrical. I think there was a feeling of like, we'd love, I think we all wanted the film to get out there and for people to be able to see it and experience it. So it was more a little bit about the date and the release plan and what PVOD is, premium video on demand and all of that. But it was, it was a conversation, and, in many ways, I think it was somewhat of a blessing in that I think people, it's maybe pretentious to say like need this, or it's the perfect time for this movie or whatever, but I do think it's helping. I think art and culture and what we do can help. I mean, I know so many people have gotten through this last year surviving off of some of the things our community has created, be it a comedy to just escape to and let go and stop sort of stressing about the real world for a moment and get a breath, or as you said, an amuse-bouche to help you get back to the reality. So, I'd be lying if I said I didn't want to on a big theater and to have that communal experience of sitting there. I got to have it twice. We had 2 previews before everything got shut down. And it was such a joy. You sit there, and when people are, cheering or falling out of their seats from the Edgar's dance or the Morgan Freeman crab, it's like, oh, I love this moment. This is, but I'm experiencing it through Twitter, I guess.
However, the movie became instantly, within hours, a water cooler conversation. Immediately, it was almost instant, and I found that fascinating. And I know we have to close, so let me close with saying this: look, few genres come automatically with a little bit of disrespect. One is fantasy or horror. The other one is a tear-inducing melodrama, and the last one, I think, is comedy. It is incredibly difficult, particularly in comedy, because often you deal with foolishness, but you need to be incredibly wise to execute that foolishness. And is what I call smart dumb, and is a balance that is extremely difficult to achieve, that requires every technical tool, every narrative tool, fantastic partnership, incredible actors, and that comes from inheriting a tradition that comes from the pratfall in silent cinema to the partners through the years, from Laurel and Hardy to Superbad to musical to everything. And it is not invisible to me and to the people that love this movie, the effort you guys put into it, the fantastic creation you did, the masterful partnership with Kristen and Annie, which is for the ages for me. I congratulate you. I let you go, and we shall go on with our afternoon as everybody else leaves this conversation. Thank you very much, Josh.
Thank you so much, Guillermo. It was an honor. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to another DGA Q&A. If you'd like to hear more, The Director's Cut is available wherever you listen to podcasts. Stay tuned in the coming weeks as we bring you discussions of films from Nisha Ganatra and Heidi Ewing, and for our annual Meet the Nominees series, which will feature panel discussions with this year's DGA Award-nominated directors, Lee Isaac Chung, Emerald Fennell, David Fincher, Aaron Sorkin, and Chloe Zhao. And be sure to subscribe, rate, and review. We'd love to hear your feedback, and you can help fellow film buffs find the show. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time. This podcast is produced by the Directors Guild of America. Music is by Dan Wally.